Welcome everyone, it's the Crypto Lark, and I'm super excited to have on today Dr. Prash. He is the CEO over at Caleb & Brown. He's joining me today to discuss OTC markets, what 2019 has in store for us. Dr. Prash, welcome.
Morning. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, for anybody who doesn't know, by the way, what Caleb & Brown is and what a brokerage firm does, can you just give us a quick breakdown on that before we jump into our OTC conversation?
Sure. It's a common question that gets asked because I think in this space people are quite familiar with exchanges, whereas brokerage tends to convey impressions that are more akin to the traditional financial services industry. And to an extent, that's really where the answer is. The idea for brokerage is to bring what the traditional financial services have always had in terms of that brokerage model, where every client gets a personal broker that talks them through, works with them through the entire investment portfolio, and bring that to the crypto market. And that's exactly what we offer our clients. So every client, like I said, gets a personal broker who takes you through everything from education to wallet setup and security, and then large volume, the capacity for large volume buys and sells at a spot price with instant settlement. And then we've got an analyst team that provides ongoing market analysis that allows for diversification opportunities, and an in-house accountant that does crypto tax consultancy, lets people put crypto into their self-managed super funds. The idea is to create a sort of cradle-to-grave solution for an investor's entire cryptocurrency needs. And it's all done by a personalized model.
Now, I've been using actually Caleb & Brown for, I don't know, maybe 6 months or something now, and I've been really happy with the
Yeah.
service, by the way, which is why I'm always happy to talk to you guys, and I'm happy to provide a link to your services. By the way, if anybody wants to check out Caleb & Brown, wants to get signed up for whether it be the OTC trading or the buying and selling, whatever it might be, there is a link down below in the description of the video, so you guys can go ahead and check that out. But what I really wanted to pick your brain about today is the OTC market, because this is such a fascinating area that I don't think most people have enough information about, because the OTC market is big. We're always being told how much OTC trading is going on, but you don't really see it,
Yeah.
right? So can you tell us, being someone who's really working on that inside, what's going on in the OTC market right now?
I'll split the conversation about the OTC market into two primary divisions. And the first one is the one that everyone's probably primarily curious about because it's this, that the underwater portion of the iceberg, the thing that no one seems to understand or have any visibility about. And that's a large portion of the OTC market. A lot of the large volume deals, which tend to pass not over exchanges, so there's no reflection in terms of market price movements. But these are the things that happen behind the scenes, particularly with institutional investors often, who are looking to make large volume ins and outs of the industry. A lot of the mining pools, for example, they sell the coins that they mine via the OTC market. And really, in a sentence, what an OTC market is the capacity to sell a large volume at a single spot price without any market movements directly from one buyer to another seller, often with a broker in the middle who facilitates the whole transaction. That's the OTC market. Now, what proportion of global trading volume is done in OTC? It's really very hard to know. There's the Ernst & Young report that suggested that about 30 to 35% of global trading volume was happening on the OTC market. But really, it is very hard to know. Being a brokerage, we do sit sort of in the middle of a lot of these deals and do get some visibility as to what's happening. But again, we only know have visibility over what's coming across our
Of
desks,
course.
what's happening globally. It's really hard to know. That's one element of the OTC market. The second element of the OTC market, and what should be actually more interesting to your listeners and, well, to our clients, is the bit that we're involved in. We would like to take away this sort of delusion that the OTC market is only for the big whales, it's only for the institutional investors, it's only for people with 20, 30, $100 million to spare. The point of our brokerage is that we're able to offer that OTC market exposure to our entire client base. So we're an OTC brokerage, and every one of our clients, every single one of their purchases happens OTC. In that, if you want to buy $50,000 worth of Bitcoin tomorrow, you don't need to work through the slippage on an order book. You don't need to work through an exchange. You buy that OTC through us, in that the price that you get when you buy through us is that it's all offered at a single spot price, which is pegged to an average of international markets, and no slippage has to be factored in. And the capacity for retail investors to have access to that OTC market I think it's a huge value proposition that people don't necessarily realize, or that people don't necessarily usually have access to via conventional means, and therefore just not privy to the fact that that's a possibility.
Yeah, and of course, you guys are available to people all over the world as a global service. You're based in Australia. I'm based in New Zealand. I use Caleb and Brown all the time, but
Yeah.
it is a global service, so it is kind of that experience for people who do want to make slightly larger orders, but not in the millions. It's definitely a service for everybody. I'm certainly not making orders in the millions. Maybe one of these days, though, Dr. Prash. Well, I'll keep working on my investments,
We
but
That's what we all hope for.
that's
But
right.
yeah, absolutely. We accept any major fiat currency, and we're able to procure absolutely any cryptocurrency that's out there for our clients, which makes it no longer a geographically limited market anymore.
That's the amazing thing about cryptos. It's
It is.
anywhere, anytime. It's quite
Yeah.
awesome. Now, in terms of the sellers on the OTC market right now, who's selling? Especially at these prices, who are the sellers? Who, in your experience, are the people or the institutions that are actually looking to make sales right now in cryptocurrencies?
It is an interesting question considering the current market, and definitely the sell volume has come down considerably, mainly because the direct sellers that we would normally have stopped selling. But there are mining pools, for
Hmm.
example. There are large liquidity pools, and this is a whole word that become world. It's quite hard to describe because there's so many layers to this. And this is sort of the back end, similar to the back end of financial markets, if you consider how complicated that can be. It's a similar thing with crypto markets. But there are large liquidity pools and large mining pools who are constantly getting an influx of coins coming through, and for the sake of their liquidity, still need to turn that around. And they're the ones who are still selling at this point, even if you may suggest that it seems counterintuitive to sell now. But liquidity is liquidity,
That's right.
and by definition, should remain as liquid as possible.
Yeah, I can certainly understand from like the mining pools, for example. They have a daily burn rate. They need to keep that cash coming in
Absolutely.
to keep the machines running, basically. And if they
Mhm.
don't have a daily influx of cash, they're having a problem.
Yeah.
And now, what about the buyers then? I mean, do you see a lot of retail investors coming in right now and saying, this is the time I want to put 50 grand down on Bitcoin? Or is it mostly like, more institutional buyers at this point?
So there's a discrepancy between what I hope would be happening and what actually is happening. Um, I suppose what I hope to see happening now is for a lot of retail investors to be jumping in while the price point is the way it is. The reality is that a lot of retail investors, unfortunately, are still prone to, I guess, investor psychology, or
Hmm.
the way a lot of investing psychology works, which is to still be quite tentative when you see the price points hitting where it is now, when you still see that volatility. Conversely, the more educated investors, or people who have been investing for a much longer period of time in traditional markets, often the institutional investors, seem to be seeing this as a great time to jump into the market. And I can completely understand why. I do expect that often with the retail investors never buy at the bottom, so to speak, because there's a certain level of security that they want to see the price starting to rise up again before
Hmm.
they head back in. And I expect that is what we'll see as this bottom, as we consider it, starts to level out. We'll probably see a lot more retail investors sort of coming in as the price starts to maybe pick up just a slight, teeny wee bit. My hope is still that the retail investors see the potential now and start to jump in the way that institutions are definitely starting to get interested.
Hmm.
It's worthwhile remembering that institutional buyers coming into the market now are not reflected in the price on exchanges if it's all happening OTC. And that should be in the background for any retail investor thinking about what the current climate looks like.
Yeah, it's follow the big money. They usually know what's going on, and to see that institutional investors are the ones that are buying up right now, it's because they know. They have
They've been
these
around for a
bigger
long
pictures.
time. They've been around for a long time, and I think particularly with the crypto market or the crypto investor, we've emboldened ourselves, particularly with the way the prices went up, and despite all the criticism from the traditional financial markets, we've developed a sense of overconfidence, perhaps, that we know better. Um, Even if that sense of overconfidence should have diminished in the last 6 months. But we're still holding on to that early adopter arrogance in a way. But for me, at least, a lot of my circles in terms of the work I do is from, being that bridge between the traditional financial market and the crypto market. And the more I talk to these people, the more I get to know the financial incumbents. They've been in this for a while. They are where they are because of what they know and how much they understand. And yeah, follow the big money. Absolutely.
And now, what assets are they buying primarily? I mean, is it mostly just Bitcoin? Are you finding that investors are a little more scared of Ethereum due to the scaling issues, or are they going on more speculative, low cap assets?
I should couch, so start this with the fact that this is not financial advice that I'm providing right now.
Just
But
opinions, guys. Just opinions, guys.
sure, yes, just opinions, or more experience of what's actually happening. Bitcoin is certainly the biggest buy by far, and that sort of makes sense if you consider it that which pulls the tide up. It makes a lot of sense that people are investing in Bitcoin now and considering diversification options a bit later. I think particularly the institutional market has been left, scarred is the wrong word, but wary of altcoins, particularly with the way the whole ICO environment has played out over the last 6 months. And again, I don't blame them. And so I think it will be a bit of time as the ICO market looks to recover investor confidence. I think something needs to be shown in terms of product before that ICO market starts to really recover. And before the institutional players are willing to get in the game. I think the financial incumbents already see crypto as a risky investment, but even within that, there's the layers of risk. And the ICO market, you can imagine where that sits in terms of risk profile. And institutional investors still tend to be risk averse. Often they're investing on behalf of their investors. And so risk profile tends to be paramount on their mind. And so the fact that they've been looking at Bitcoin foremost, rather than more speculative investments such as ICOs tend to be, doesn't surprise me in the slightest.
And now, obviously, the ICO boom was massive, absolutely massive, the ICO boom. And the end of that boom has been equally massive. But the next big promise in terms of what's going to bring a lot of liquidity and a lot of money flowing into the market, the STO market, this is the security token market. Do you see that hype as being warranted, or do you think that this might be another overhyped, speculative run-up kind of situation?
Hype often implies that there is an empty hole behind it. And I think the ICO market was a good reflection of that, in that the tokens you were buying often didn't have any fundamental value attached to them as yet, particularly without an existing product. With the security token, we need to use the word hype a lot more cautiously because there is a fundamental value attached to the back of it, which would be equity of some form, a share in something with existing value. In that way, I think it's much less susceptible to this idea of pure hype. In that way, I think it makes for a much more secure investing environment because there's a vested interest in the party, in the company, if you want to think of it that way, behind the product to produce something, because their value, their profit is tied in inextricably with the investors' profits. So it's less susceptible to hype, put it that way, than the ICO market. It has a lot more security behind it. Pardon the pun if you want to call it that. And the biggest problem or the biggest issue that the security token market is going to face is regulation. Unlike the ICO market, where I would be out there firmly saying, yeah, absolutely, it's a positive. We need this regulation to stabilize this environment. With the security token market, well, I think it's completely necessary. It's what's going to slow down that uptake because the regulators still have not caught up. They still haven't got a good idea as to exactly what this regulation is going to look like. And the ICO market saw a huge boom because of its capacity to take in rapid investment immediately right now. And the STO2 market still has a way to go to catch up with that. And until that happens, we're not going to see the same sort of rapid rise that the ICO market saw. I don't think that's a bad thing, though. The fact that this market is going to take its time to develop is definitely not a bad thing. It does mean that a lot of projects will slow down in terms of their trajectory. There are some problems there in terms of extended run rates or runways that are going to be required to get the projects off the ground, because you're not going to be able to raise capital as quickly as you were in the past. And so I know some projects will face issues around that if they hadn't necessarily budgeted for that sort of runways prior. But in the long run, I think it's going to be a much better thing for the industry. I think it will be a much better means of accelerating mainstream adoption. I think it'll be a much better means of establishing a sense of solidarity with the financial services industry, which I think for the long-term prospects of the crypto industry is absolutely integral.
Very interesting. I'm certainly excited about the STO market, but I can agree with your comments that it's better to do it deliberately versus just, it's a bonanza, guys. Let's just do everything immediately and get a bunch of regulatory crackdown again, which is what the ICO market saw. And so the STO market does offer some amazing opportunities, though, when it starts to pick up. And it might take a couple of years, but I feel like we get so impatient sometimes as investors. We want it all right now. And it's just not like that. Good technology takes time to build. Good investments take time to return good profits as well. And that's something that not all investors have in mind when they jump into cryptos. I'm going to be rich overnight. And of course, it's a bit of a slower process than that when it comes down to it.
We've been spoilt in the crypto market. We've really been spoilt. And if you think back objectively to people going, oh, it's been 4 months since ICO. It's been 5 months since ICO. They raised $30 million in ICO. It's been 5 months. What do you mean they don't have any project yet? You invested in this ICO with just a white paper. You knew when you invested that all there was a white paper. And 5 months later, you want a product. If you've ever been involved in business, if you've ever tried to build a company, 5 months is laughable.
Not a long time.
It's not a long time. And so the time scale has been warped to such an extent by the kind of initial optimism in the crypto market and by investors who had no prior investing experience to that depth. And I think that's what we're seeing in terms of the way investor sentiment has responded to maybe projects not producing things in the same sort of accelerated timeline that they were initially expecting.
There's been some really big things happening in the crypto markets overall recently. I want to get just Cordy your quick hot take on a few of these different things. The Intercontinental Exchange is launching Backed. What do you think about it?
I think it'll be a great thing for the market. I think it'll be a great thing for mainstream adoption. And the market's begging out for something that, again, more closely resembles what the traditional financial services have had for all this while, and something that will allow the financial incumbents to put their money into crypto. Now, my personal opinion is an ETF isn't that necessary, unlike perhaps some other investments or some other commodities where an ETF is quite necessary to help facilitate money coming into that market. With crypto, I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I think custody, secure storage, and a trusted intermediary or infrastructure is what's going to be most important. But the ETF line is the way the traditional financial services have always worked. It's what they recognize, what they understand. And so it's a perfect Trojan horse in a way to sneak into that market. So in that way, I think it's the short to medium term, I think it's a big positive. The elephant in the room remains whether the SEC what the SEC will decide, and more importantly, when the SEC will decide. I think the SEC has persistently shown that the when is the greater question, because their favorite tactic has been delays. And all we've seen really has been delay after delay after delay. Whether another delay how that will reflect in the market remains to be seen, whether that will be seen as a further setback by the market and push prices down further, or whether it will just be seen as, oh, this is just par for the course. This is just the SEC continuing to do its thing. That I don't have a clear answer on. I think we've gotten to a time where the market's gotten frustrated enough with the SEC that a further delay is not something that we see as that negative. There was a time where the market reacted quite adversely to it. So I'm less concerned about a negative or a delayed reaction. But a positive reaction, I think, will make a big, huge difference to the way the crypto market's behaving at the moment.
Yeah. Well, of course, the funny thing is, I'm in New Zealand, you're in Australia.
Mhm.
And here we are talking about the SEC, and it is important. And a lot of people say, well, yeah, but it's only America's only one country. Well, it's a gigantic economy, and what happens in the US can have really sort of these reverberating effects around the world, especially in the Anglo countries like the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. We tend to look to the US for inspiration around some of these things. But we have recently seen Switzerland
Mhm.
launching the exchange traded product, the Six Swiss, is it called Amun, the index
Yep.
product that they're
That's the one.
offering there.
Yep.
So this has been really popular on the Six Swiss exchange. It's now their biggest product in terms of volume. They had now Six Swiss is not a gigantic exchange by any means when compared to like the New York Stock Exchange or something like that, but nevertheless it has been popular. So what are your thoughts on the new product from Switzerland?
I think it's a great move because it gives us a case study. It's not going to, and we've already seen that, it hasn't necessarily caused the great price movement. You don't see this whole crypto industry going, oh, yay, we've got an ETF. It's out in where? Uh, and the price going up. Because the market just isn't as big. The size of the financial market
Mm.
doesn't have that same sort of sway. But as a case study, I think it becomes very relevant. And I do expect that the SEC will be looking at this quite closely as a case study. And I expect that other financial markets around the world will start to look at this as a case study. And I do hope that it's a success. And that particularly in the Australian market, that we start to consider this as an example of how we don't need to wait for Big Daddy over at the SEC
Hmm.
to give us all our direction. We do tend to fall behind the American market in terms of going with whatever they decide to do. We tend not to be the people who forge ahead here in Australia and New Zealand, fortunately
It's
and
even worse in
unfortunately.
New Zealand because you guys look to the States and we look to Australia to see what Australia's doing. So we have to wait until you see what the
Yeah,
Americans are doing to find out what we're gonna
yeah,
do. It's
yes.
crazy.
Yeah, a lot of intermediaries here. But as a case study, I think it'll be very interesting. And I imagine a lot of academics within the crypto space, few and far between as they are, starting to look at this as a good example. And I expect a lot of intellectual property to come out of this.
Very, very interesting. Dr. Prash, this has been a great chat on the OTC markets and kind of what's happening in the crypto space. Again, everyone, there is a link down below to Caleb and Brown. I'd recommend to go ahead and check out their services. Definitely one of my go-tos. And thank you so much for coming on the show today to tell everyone a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes.
Thank you, Lark. Look, I'm very glad to be here. I just thought I should reiterate that while we spent a lot of the time talking about the OTC space at large, our focus at CNB is to bring that OTC space to the individual investor, to the retail investor, and I don't think the retail investor should be exempt from the benefits that the OTC space allows. So yeah, feel free to click on the link, follow us, sign up with us, and get yourself your own personal broker.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Bye bye.